Hi, everyone. Welcome to Author Talks, where writers are an open book. Thanks so much for being here with us today. I am host, writer, and editor Jane VanVooren Rogers, and I am so thrilled to be here today with author Colleen Burns Durda, author of The Second, a memoir of love and commitment. Colleen, thank you so much for being here. So excited to have you.
Oh, thank you so much, Jane. It's wonderful to be here. It's a great opportunity, and it's all due to you. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks. I would just first off just like to thank you for your bravery and your vulnerability in writing this book, because I think that there are just so many times that it frees other people when you are brave enough to share your story. And so I think that this is definitely one of those times, and it has helped, to free me in new ways too. So thank you.
Yeah, that's great to hear. It was a little scary, and it was most scary. I was telling someone just recently, it was most scary the first time I hit send and sent it to the editor. And when I sent it to the editor, it was like, oh, there it goes. There it's off and running. And then after it came back in not incredibly glowing terms, the manuscript came back and it was like, you got to fix a few things. And I was like, I do. That wasn't it for one try. And and once I did that, it took on a life of its own. It became more of a project, and the self-revelatory things and the things that were in some people's minds kind of embarrassing or kind of uncomfortable to talk about kind of got dampened. And I felt more like it was a project that was on its own legs and on its own feet and doing its own thing. So it was, that initial hit send. And once I got past that, it was off and running.
So when people ask you, what is this book about? What do you tell them?
It's about vulnerability, and it's about everybody has their something. And for me, it's bipolar affective disorder. It's mental illness, and how it affected my marriage, how it affected my parenting, how it affected my life as a woman and a person in the world. And I don't believe that bipolar affective disorder is the end all be all worst thing in the world that can happen to someone. Everybody has their something. And I really hesitate to compare difficulties and things like that. I know that it just felt like something I was tasked to deal with in this life. And I wanted to tell people also because I had hid it for so long. I hid it for a long time, and I thought, Miss Suburban Mom doing the suburban thing in the Midwest really wasn't that. It was much darker and much scarier and much more involved than what I presented publicly. So I wanted to dig into that a little.
Wow. I love the statement, everyone has their something. That is so true. And again, I think, unfortunately, as we've, talked about a little bit before, Colleen and I had met earlier this week just to talk a little bit in advance about this. And unfortunately, there is still, such a stigma and an embarrassment and a shame sometimes around mental illness. And I had shared with Colleen that I had actually had a postpartum hospitalization about 10 years ago, 11 years ago now. And that's been, I've been through a lot of difficult things in life, and that was probably the most difficult thing that I've ever been through. And so I wanted to let Colleen know that, not only did I want to have her on this show, to talk and share about her book, but also I wanted to let her know that I personally related to her story. Even though our stories aren't the same, I identified a lot with certain things that you brought up.
Yeah, and that is so helpful to me, because that hits right to the heart of why I wrote the book. I want to hear from other people. I want to hear from other people that they live to tell. There are parts of these mental illness difficulties that you think, I am never going to get better. I am never going to get out of this. And it's so shameful, and it's so different from a lot of things that you see other people go through. I mean, and for me, it was episodic. It came back and came back and came back. And each time I was like, I never thought, oh, well, I'll just wait it out for a few days. I thought I was locked in for good. I thought, this is the time. This is the time it doesn't go away. And then each time it would clear up. So it's a frightening thing to go through.
So can you talk some about that experience of being hospitalized and what that's like when all of a sudden you find that maybe your mind isn't quite where it should be, and you kind of feel somewhat out of control and then become hospitalized? What was that like?
The very first time was extremely spiritual, and I really felt on a mission. I felt like, when I was little, I studied Our Lady of Lourdes and some of the visions that the Catholic saints would go through, and I thought, this is my call. This is it. This is when God's telling me, Colleen, it's your turn. Come on in and join the saints. And I'm like, I just thought, well, I was always supposed to be ready, and now I'm ready. So I was like, let's go cure people. And when that didn't turn out so great, I was like, wait a minute. They're telling me there's something actually not only not great, but really wrong with me. And that dichotomy, that change from the most gifted person on the planet to really, really sick and needs to be in the hospital and under the care of a locked ward, I was like, wait a minute, I couldn't deal with that. So I didn't deal with it for many days. And I continued to hang on to the fantasy that I was somehow God or God's messenger or something like that. And it was more comforting than being a mental patient, I'll tell you. And so it took a lot of breaking down and breaking through to accept that I needed help, and it was going to be a lifelong thing. And it was, the doctor, as I describe in the book, says, you'll be on this the rest of your life. And I'm like, what? I don't even take aspirin. How am I supposed to take drugs for something I didn't even know I had? It was like the whole 2 weeks was a shock. And then when it happened again, it was 100% failure. It was 100% failure that it would return, because I was taking the medication. I was under the care of a psychiatrist. I was doing everything I was supposed to do, and it visited me again. And I don't share in the book, but the doctor said something like, if you're on the medication and the voice of God comes back, then it's real. And he was messing with me. And I thought, that wasn't funny. That was not funny. And we were of different spiritual beliefs. And I was like, you can't do that to people. I don't care where you're coming from, professionally, emotionally, that is just a wrong thing to do to someone. There's a movie, and I'm angry that I forgot the title to it, but one of the lines of the characters is, don't mess with my psychosis. Don't let me share with you how vulnerable I am that I'm having these thoughts. And then you dig in there and say, by the way, you might be God. I mean, that's just rude and beyond rude. That's just almost criminal. And so.
Well, and how sad that someone in the mental health, medical community, if those people are going to mess with you, which I experienced that as well, sarcastic and angry comments. I got, oh yeah, Jane, because we're just here to mess with you, and you go. And when you're already in a place of feeling like something's going on in your life and something's bad and you're suspicious of people and all that, those kind of comments can be such a terrible reinforcer of like, yeah, I'm supposed to be in a safe place.
Right.
And even these people are messing with me. Like,
Right. It
where
gives
is
you
the
feeling
safety
like,
in
where
that?
am I supposed to go? And a lot of people, I just have to throw this in because I have thought about it a lot. One of the first books I read was something about, and the original back in 1989, the literature and what was available and stuff was not very informative. You know, there was Patty Duke's book, which was very good, and then there was a couple other books that were okay, but there was one book that I found that I was like, I don't know if this even makes any sense. She was describing her manic episode as if it were still real. It's like she never came back down. And I thought, oh, this isn't helpful because I know reading that you're not in a good place. But you as a writer appear to be convinced of your own psychosis. And I thought, this is not going well for me. But a fantasy of a lot of people that have been in hospital treatment is, why isn't there a place that we can go that isn't locked up, that is more sylvan, more nature, more let's heal and feel better. And to have these retreat areas where you could have your episode or whatever and come back to reality, it seems would be more humane than the way we get treated now, with being locked up and being treated a little less than gently.
Human.
In some respects, just to be as euphemistic as possible.
Right.
Yeah, there are better and worse places to go when you're sick. Yeah.
Well, and honestly, you know, I had told you earlier, you know, that I was definitely having a postpartum manic episode. When I look back and I look at the sort of the clinical, you know, aspects, like that was definitely, you know, what was going on. And I had kind of stopped eating, stopped sleeping. I had been awake
Yeah.
for days and, you know, that kind of a thing. But again, I did find myself, especially after the hospitalization, going, the hospitalization that was supposed to be a few days and ended up being 2 weeks, especially away from my baby daughter and my family, that I agree on wishing for some kind of safe place that I could have, you know, stayed in my house. Like, yeah, maybe I wasn't fully, you know, where I needed to be. And I can admit that now, I can see that now. But going into that kind of environment, which was, and I feel that you, in writing about this, have shed a lot of important light on kind of what that's really like, of, you know, even just talking about the terminology, I think that you share of, you know, you're on the unit and you've got to go to group and, you know, you see a doctor for just a brief time during the day, like a few minutes. Like, how are they supposed to know, you know, how you're actually doing? And then, you know, being in a co-ed environment as a woman, wearing nothing but, you know, a hospital gown. And especially as a postpartum woman, I mean, it was terrifying. I felt like prey.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. There's that aspect all day long. Absolutely. And I think that I think because of the economics of it, they can't afford a fully female unit, and, you know, they have to mix everybody in. And when people aren't well, it's a scary environment.
It was absolutely a scary environment. And then you've got this kind of rotating cast of scary characters between sometimes the medical staff and then sometimes also the fellow patients who are there. And,
Yeah.
you know, I remember them saying to us, like, oh, you're all here for a different reason. You're all here for different reasons. But that also seemed like that kind of vague almost sort of coded speech that, even though, yes, maybe we were all there for different reasons, putting all of those different reasons together in this sort of cesspool of drama and mental illness, I don't think is a healthy situation for anyone.
Yes, I do think ideally I would like to be in a, like I said, in a place that would be in a different environment, and I was trying to describe for people that had never been there and hadn't and will never go, what it's like to go from the street to the unit back to the street when you have this experience in your head now and you will never forget it. And a lot of people think, oh, well, you had a manic episode, the whole thing's blacked out. You leave the hospital and you sign your discharge and you're gone. And I'm like, no, it lives with you. You remember a lot of it. You remember most of it. Maybe not every word you say, but that's what the chart's for. They remember that.
Well, and I remember the part in your book where you talk about that you had a private conversation with someone who had come to visit you, and then you had one of the medical staff people comment to you afterward, like, oh, you did a good job in there.
Yeah.
And that a fellow patient had warned you, like, kind of like the whole don't trust anybody. They're always listening. They're always charting. And once again, those kind of incidents give a lot of credence to that fear.
Yeah, I thought I had to get it out. I had to say what I wanted to say and have this interview with this person. And then when they said you did a good job in there, I was like, what did you see? Where were you? Where's the camera? It's just, I had no time to react. It was back to more OT and back to more therapy. And it was like, I didn't have any time to react to the knowledge that I'm always watched on the unit, no matter who I'm visiting with.
And that's not real comforting to people who are struggling or maybe struggling with paranoia issues and, and again, are perhaps somewhat out of touch with reality. That definitely is not helpful.
Yeah.
Did that really kind of frighten you after that comment was made?
I think there's a certain numbness that you have on the unit, that you have like this protection around your brain and around your person that you say, that didn't happen. There's so much denial involved for me that I just said, I can't believe that person came into the hospital anyway. And I can't believe that conversation happened. And I don't believe he said what he said, but he really did. And there's so much denial as to what's happening at the time that it's almost protective. It's almost protective. And it kept me from, in this state today, dealing with it, I would be in a completely different state. But I also believe, and I may be wrong on that the medication that I was on also had kind of a protective feel to it, that I didn't have a full experience of using my whole brain. It was like dampened down or something. It was like sedated. It was sedated.
Well, and you had also referenced, barely taking aspirin and then having all of these, medications thrown at you. And I also related to that, because I tend to be sort of a naturalist, and then being in this situation where suddenly you're forced to take these medications and you feel almost like a lab rat to a certain degree.
Yeah. And there's a lot of experimentation. Unfortunately, that's part of the medical model that you have to go through, that let's put you on this frontline drug. And if it doesn't work, well, then we'll talk about it later, but this is your frontline drug that you're going to try. And it turns out didn't do anything for me. Mm-hmm. And then it was different things. And then I had a drug. I remember that I was at my daughter's first communion and I couldn't do the stairs in a very large, open contemporary church. I was like, I can't see. and it was part of the side effects of the thing I was taking.
Oh,
And
wow.
I went home and took a nap, and it was like, I can't be on this. I can't function. And it was just, oh well, that one didn't work for you, and I'm like, why did you start it? But it just, they didn't know till they tried. And so, when people are going through difficulties with, I hate my medication, blah blah blah, I feel for them, because you have to keep going. You have to keep finding, you have to keep trying until you find something that works.
Mm. So let's back up just a little bit. So what led up to your first episode? What were some of the factors?
I believe it was a number of things. It was, the marriage had become strained. I had recently had my fourth child, and I was 28 years old, which a lot of people might find that a little bit brisk of a rate. And that was hard for me. I was home all day. I realized after I went to the hospital that I hadn't had a break in a long, long time. And I was like on call as a mom 24/7, and I didn't have a natural, I didn't know what a weekend was, because that was what people who worked had. I just kept going all the time and didn't feel the pressure starting or building or any of that. And I became, what would the word be? Beyond, it was obsessed. It was obsessed with my physician. And he, to me, was an avenue out of feeling uptight, of feeling pressure. He gave me a lot of feedback that, I'm young and attractive. I could do anything. I could, be in any relationship, and I'm like, is he talking about with him? I mean, I didn't know, and I had no one to ask. I had nowhere to go or nowhere to take that. I'm like, is he telling me the truth, or is he just weird? And so it was like this vice was closing in. And till one night I said, well, I'll just tell him that it's him that I'm interested in. And I wrote him a letter and I mailed it. And the pressure of having that stupid letter in the mailbox up the street, I think broke my brain. I think that caused the episode. It was the finally coming clean on those thoughts and feelings, mailing the thing, and because I felt the deterioration and I literally, if there was a sound effect to what happened, it was like cracking a walnut. My brain broke. It broke. It couldn't take it anymore. And so it happened one hot summer night. And then the next morning, my family got introduced to, what do you do when your family member loses their mind? And there was some misinformation, you have to be suicidal or no one's going to take you in the hospital, and which is false. You don't have to be suicidal. You have to be sick. And I was sick, and I didn't even know it. Yeah, it was traumatic. And I went in the car with my dad and my mom and my husband, and my dear sister Maureen came over and watched all four kids. And I had to say goodbye to the kids, not knowing if or when I would ever come back. I had no idea.
How awful.
Yeah, it was bad. It was bad. And so my brain was completely jumped the tracks. And it was, like I said, almost protective. If I went in a depressive state or in a different state of mind, I have no explanation for how I would have felt. I was absolutely high as a kite. I was convinced that God had intervened the night before. I had a very, very vivid spiritual life review. I had all of that happen the night I got sick. So I thought it was real. I'm like, this is it. This is what it feels like to be touched by God. There you go.
Well, and looking back on that today, do you still feel that you were having, a legitimate spiritual experience mixed in with, the mental illness that was going on?
I think in my belief system, I was in some sort of communication with God. I really do, because in my belief system, God had to intervene. Maybe God gave me, maybe God gave me the strength to go and face whatever it was I had to face at the hospital. Maybe God gave my parents and my husband the strength to drop me off at the locked unit and walk home or drive home and say, I don't know when my wife or my daughter is ever going to feel better, but this is where she had to go.
Mhm.
And all of that, I believe in, getting the strength from God to have this happen. Was all the other stuff true? Maybe not. Maybe, thinking that I was going to cure people and I was the second coming, which is the reason for the title of the book. I am the second coming. And it's like, yeah, we can laugh about it, but there were a couple times that I thought it was true, which is how I ended up in the hospital. It's coincidental that I'm the second born in my family, and
Mhm.
I know what being second is. And so the second has a lot of reasons, but um, yeah, yeah, that morning on that day in June 1989, I was convinced. I was it.
Well, and I mean, it's not funny. It's
I
not
know.
funny. I'm laughing, but it's not funny when you're having thoughts like that. It's not
Yeah.
funny. It is serious, and you feel as though, I don't know that mine went quite that far, but I was definitely having some religious visions, and mine was more on like crucifixion and things like that. That I
Yeah.
mean, I was terrified that something like that was going to happen to me, or
Oh,
my
okay.
child, or something like that. And I did feel, like I was in this grand battle of like good and evil. And I mean, so all these years later, I feel like I'm still trying to shake out, like, okay, so what pieces of that, of all the experiences that I had, within that single episode, what was like legit spiritual experiences, and what was not. And obviously, like you said, looking back now, I can see that some of those really serious things that I was worried about at the time were not happening, not real, but man, it sure felt real at the time.
Exactly. And I think the power to discern those feelings just comes with time. And the more, and it's not just days on the calendar that go by. It's your ability and your constant thinking about why some of these things might have come into your life and how they would help you later in your life, and the discernment that comes. And when I finally decided that um there was a place for everything that happened that night, there really was. And it wasn't, my marriage healed because of some of the difficulties that happened that night. And my spiritual life took a completely different slant after that. I could no longer deny that there was a bigger overarching um sense of well-being in the world that would help me through something so heinous.
Mm.
And I just said, um, it's I don't want to discount everything that happens because, like we were talking a little bit earlier, there is no handbook for what happens in your life. You have to determine that. You have to be the one to say, this was real, this was fantasy, this was such and such. And I sought all those people for validation for my experience for years. And it was finally much later in life, I mean, decades later, that I came to the conclusion, nobody can give me the validation that I have to give myself.
Mm.
That is, you have to be the one to decide and discern what was real, because I don't want to throw everything out with either one. It wasn't 100% spiritual. It wasn't 100% illness. There
Yes.
is a mix, and it just does a weird ball of yarn inside your head.
Absolutely. And I know you describe it that way in the book as well, that it is like this ball of yarn and trying to follow these threads and then going, oh, okay, so this thing that I was thinking was not right on. But when you write about like the voice of God as an example in your book, I mean, it does seem, very benevolent, very comforting, very nothing malicious in that. Very much like, you're going to you're going to go through something difficult, but it's going to be okay. And I also had kind of some almost like premonitions like that, where my grandmother, who had passed away at that point, she had, like dementia. And somehow I was getting like this premonition of like, I'm going to go through something like what she went through. And I was kind of getting that. And of course, that was terrifying to think, you think, am I going to forget who I am? Or like, what does that mean? But, whatever you want to call that, whether it was a premonition or spiritual guidance or, whatever. But I mean, I really did. I felt like I kind of got a forecast of like, you're in for the battle of your life. Like, you're going to be okay.
I can't laugh because it's almost a relief for me to hear that it has happened to other people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and like I said, that was, when I started looking more at your book and delving more into that, I was reading your first chapter and just going like, oh yeah, that sounds familiar. I didn't necessarily think that I was Jesus, but I did. I mean, even just being on the unit and talking with other people and listening to their problems and things like that, and feeling like I could see them brighten up when I would smile at them, or I could see that I was accomplishing something positive. I wasn't necessarily healing them, but I mean, that those parts felt legit. And so again, like me reading your first chapter, I'm going, oh yeah, I've been there. I know what that's like. And so, I mean, I think that's just so interesting and so, again, so powerful. And I'm so appreciative to you for opening up and sharing that, because again, I think unless we open up and we are vulnerable and share these stories, how else are we going to heal from it? How else are we going to, be able to discern, things? So, I mean, I figured that you would probably find that surprising, though, if, someone reading your first chapter, unless they've had a manic episode, or unless they've struggled with bipolar disorder, and of which there are many, of those folks out there. But, obviously not everyone is going to relate to that personally.
Right.
But I did.
Yeah, exactly. The relativity part is much more of a surprise than what is wrong with this woman? I mean, I anticipated that more of a reaction. But it is the whole point of writing the book is so that we can come together as a society, as a community, and say, it happens. It's part of life. It's part of some people's experience that we have to honor and say, it's something that you went through, and it was tough for you, and I'm not going to judge you for it. It's a disease of emotion. It's a disease of your brain. It's a disease of, your the way you see yourself in the world, and that's so different from breaking your arm. It's so different. And people, I do think there's a universal fear. everyone laughs about crazy people and what it's like to, hey, let's go crazy and, all that stuff, because it's a universal fear that you're going to jump the tracks and lose your brain. It's not unusual that people feel that way, I think. And so when someone does, it's like, let me put some space between you and me, because I don't want to think that happens to people.
Mm-hmm. Or almost like, I think with, divorce or other difficulties in life too. I think that, again, sometimes it can cause people to create those barriers of almost like, oh, well, I don't want this to happen to me, so I'm just not going to talk to you.
Right. I'm not going to hear about your experience because I don't even know.
Okay, well, all right. I mean, it's not catching, mental illness
Right.
isn't catching, divorce isn't
No, it is
something
not.
you can catch. But I think, again, it's sad sometimes that people do, need to create, those kind of barriers and just sort of, disown someone who's had those experiences. And I was also struck by the part in the book where you talk about how you had a physical surgery at one point and how overwhelmed you were with, cards and gifts and notes and offers of help and all these things. And then the stark comparison to when you went through difficult times mentally and how it was just crickets.
Yeah.
And once again, why is it okay to have physical ailments, and people are so understanding of, oh, well, he broke his leg, or, she's having this health issue, so we've got to give her, space. But as soon as it's a mental health issue, it's like, oh, that, like that kind of thing.
And I think for me, it was, that again.
Mm-hmm.
First time, huge outpouring of help. I had little teeny children. I had a village come in and help me because I was gone for 2 full weeks doing a job I did 24 hours a day, every day. And it took an enormous number of people to step in and be the mom. And I was so appreciative and everything. And it was really great. And then it happened again. Then it happened again. And it was like, oh my God, my family just wore out, I think. And it was like, let's just pretend she's not that sick, or let's pretend it's not that disruptive for her, because I think the compassion fatigue is what happened. It was too many times, over and over with the same illness, and it got to be too much for the family. It's my belief. We haven't really discussed it, but
how many times, Colleen, did you have that happen, and at what intervals roughly, or did it? I know it varied some.
There was one interval that I went 9 years between episodes that hospitalized me. I think I had little mini episodes that I did at home. Took some time out. I remember a couple now that I was at my house and, missed Halloween. My mom finished making the costumes because I had like 4 costumes. I was, working on my sewing machine, and I just blasted my head, and my birthday's around that time. So I just lost everything, and mom stepped in and helped me with that. And I missed a big Halloween party and stuff because I was just in my bed because I had to sleep it off. And my doctor called in some medication, and I literally took refuge in my house. And so I was not hospitalized, but I still had an episode. But when I mentioned I lost the care of my doctor at a certain time, my psychiatrist, and during that time I was hospitalized 3 times. Because I think I couldn't handle these new doctors, and I felt like no one understood me, and I was in a really bad place. And I experienced things like partial treatment, where you don't sleep overnight, you sleep at your own house, but you're in the hospital like a job, 9 to 3 every day. And so I did that for a week. And I would say generally the interval was once every 2 years I would be in the hospital. So over that time, except for that big, long 9-year span, I think I was in 10 or 11 times.
Mm.
which is a lot
Yeah.
in the joint, in inpatient. So that's a lot. And
That
it's
is
a
a
lot
lot.
for me to deal with, and it's really a lot for the family to deal with.
I can't imagine enduring that many times,
Yeah. And each
knowing what it was
time
like.
thinking, this is it. This is going to be the one that's going to put me under. This is the one that's going to send me to the state hospital and never come back.
Well, and I know that someone at one point, when you were hospitalized, said to you, like, if you keep talking like that, you're never going to get out of here. And I had that fear too. That was a really real fear for me, especially when something that was supposed to be a few days turned into 2 weeks. You think, oh my gosh, am I ever going to get out of here? And how?
Yeah. That goes to another one of those. There is no handbook. There is no patient handbook for how to leave the hospital as quickly as possible. And it's just, it really depends on the staff you have that week. It depends on the doctor you've been assigned, because a lot of times doctors can't follow you into the hospital. They have to have the doctors that are hospital doctors taking care of you, and then you go back to your outpatient doctor when you're done. That happened to me quite a few times. And yeah, I was having these, again, religious experiences in the hospital, and they're like, we don't do that here. We don't talk like that. Just cut that out, or you're never going to get out of here. And I'm like, oh, note to self, you know?
I forgot that was what that was attached to, that
Yeah.
was what that comment was attached to.
Yeah.
And I think that's so problematic too. I think that's so problematic. And I know you and I had spoken about this a bit the other day, that there's like a clinical language around, mental disorders and issues. There's a very clinical medical language around that. But then how do, we begin to incorporate, a spiritual language and understanding as well? I know that at one point I had spoken with an Asian doctor who I felt almost like we were communicating on kind of a different level that felt more spiritual. And I felt like he just understood, what I was saying, or some of the difficulties that I was having. And yet I know that if I would have said anything about the spiritual aspect of things, that again, I mean, you can't say that at like a traditional counselor. And so
Right.
that's something I guess that I wonder about. And, do you have any thoughts on that, about how we can almost begin to kind of like bring those worlds together with, the medical and the kind of spiritual elements of things, that people in the medical field don't suddenly think that you've gone off the rails if you're talking about spiritual topics.
Right. My best advice would be to, when you're well, when you're feeling good, to develop as much of like a Zen type place where you can go, whether it's through meditation or spiritual connection or something like that. So you have like a center. So you can tell yourself, find your center and not be influenced by the help that you get that's not helpful. And when you have a sense of self and a sense of centeredness, you have a touchstone. You have a much better ability. Even, it's hard to explain, but no matter how far out you get, if you can find that place somewhere, somehow, you'll find your way back. And that's how it was for me. I do have to share, I did see something in the chat from when was your last episode? And I'm going to say publicly, my last episode was April 2021. I hit the send button on that manuscript and sent it in for publication and got sick as a dog. I just got completely ill. And I said, how could this happen after writing this book, after saying I tamed the beast of mental illness, going through all this effort, and then it happened again. And so I was hospitalized in the Twin Cities. I was hospitalized around the time of Derek Chauvin's conviction for George Floyd's murder. It was a very difficult time in Minneapolis. It was a very difficult time for the country. And it was a very difficult time for my brain. It was just watching all of that stuff and feeling all of those feelings and watching it all happen. It overwhelmed me. And I was put in the hospital and I said, wait a minute, I need to go home. I can deal with this at home. And I was on that high horse for quite a long time. The doctor just folded up the chart and walked out. He's in for 72 hours. And oh, by the way, it's over a weekend. So that doesn't count. So don't count the days that you're in here over the weekend because no one's going to look at you. So you're going to be in here for even longer than you think. And by the way, if you have any hesitancy about that, you have rights. Just call Hennepin County. And I'm like, Hennepin County is a little busy right now, with the trial and the whole 9 yards. And so it was like my head was exploding. But I went back to my room and I went back to my inner place and I said, I'm going to gut this out. I'm going to gut this out. And like 5 days later, they let me out because I was, I said, I gave them the whole 9 yards. I have an outpatient psychiatrist. I have an outpatient therapist. I have a good family. I have a supportive spouse. I have all these things going on. Let me do the rehab at home. And they said, oh, you seem much better. And I'm like, yeah, just get me out of here. And it was unbelievable the levels of emotions I went to, from shame to guilt to how could this happen again, and total anger at myself. And it wasn't my damn fault. It was the fault of what happened in the world and my reaction to it. And the total hyper focus in getting the book published. And what happened once that happened, and then I had to deal with, aren't you so happy your book's out and everything's great? And I'm like, I'm going on YouTube with no makeup and really messed up hair, and I should never do that, and I should really think twice about it, but I'm not well right now, and my book just came out. And so right around the time of exploding this book out into the public, I was really ill. So it was hard.
I'm so grateful that you shared that, Colleen, and thank you so much for your transparency about all of your story, but especially that aspect. I had seen that question in the chat too, but I didn't necessarily want to pose it to you. I thought, so I'm glad that was something that you feel comfortable, to share. And I think that, again, it's good, not only for transparency's sake, to show that this is something that still, you're dealing with. It's something that you will be dealing with going forward. And that, once again, and that there shouldn't be any shame in admitting, like, hey, I got really into my book. I got really stressed. I was, a lot of things were going on. I wasn't, maybe taking as good of care of myself as I, could have been. And so, it happened to me again. It can happen if you're not, watching for the signs, and if you're not taking good care of yourself. So I just want to thank you so much, just personally, just for being brave enough to say that your most recent episode was last year.
Yeah. I went over it and over it with my therapist about, she said, your thing is that you're transparent. Your thing is that you're talking about it, and now you want to hide it again. And I said, I know, but it's just too raw. It's just really, it it just hit me where I lived so much. And it was just 100% difficult. It wasn't anything spiritual. It wasn't anything happy. It wasn't a great euphoria. It was one of those irritable, angry manias. And I was just very difficult to deal with. And I just went to my go-to, which is hide it. It was easier for me to hide it than it was for me to say, hey, by the way, I can't do any book publicity now or marketing because I'm sick. I don't feel well. And so there was this huge stutter step with the book. And I think it had something to do with the way I keyed it in. But my print book went live before the ebook did. And I thought I blamed the publisher, and it wasn't the publisher. I think it was me. And so it was like this, everything about the book launch was a stutter step. And I just went, jeepers, I don't know what to do with that. And so I just pushed the actual launch out to October 5th, which was the Tuesday, because books come out on Tuesday. I just kind of picked a day of the week. And but it was purposefully during Mental Illness Awareness Week. And so it was a nice time of the year in Minneapolis, and people didn't have weather to deal with. And so I launched the book at that time because I was in a much better place mentally, much better place physically. And so we had a good time. We launched the book at a party that day. So that's how this whole book launch thing got a little twisted.
With that last hospitalization, were you able to endure that any more easily because you kind of knew, after having been through it so many times, and especially the way that you were speaking to the medical staff, like, hey, with your support system and with, the follow-up care and things like that. I know it was still difficult, don't get me wrong, but I'm just wondering, was it any easier to kind of just go, okay, I can just wait this out and just get through it? Or was it just as difficult as the other times?
It was a different difficult because I was the most coherent that I've ever been and hospitalized. And there's a part in the book where I describe I was treated with seclusion at one point, and that didn't happen on this hospitalization, but on a previous one it did. And you're so gone, you're so out of it that it doesn't bug you like you think it's going to bug you. And all of a sudden your brain comes back and your faculties come back, and you say, wait a minute, they locked me in a room, a padded room, and I don't belong in here. I'm somebody's grandma. Let me out, and it was that kind of realization that came later, where in this most recent hospitalization, I had that the whole time. So except for maybe when I first went in. When I first went in, I'm like, hey, you got the special one, you got the special one back in your ER, and this should be a proud moment for you, and then there was no beds, and I got shipped to another hospital, and I didn't even know. I was not convinced the hospital was real. There was a time I thought the hospital was closed, and they had kept me in it, and the staff was all like ghosts or something, and I just thought, oh, this is not a good place. This is not a good place to be, because I had lived in the Twin Cities my entire life and I'd never heard of this hospital.
Oh, wow.
And
I can see why you would be suspicious of that.
And I was suspicious of that. And I said,
makes sense.
I'm a pretty aware person. That's right. This doesn't exist, and it's actually closed, and we'll never get out. Me and all of you in it. And so that was a really bad moment. But yeah, it's the awareness that you have. It's kind of hard to describe, but it's the awareness you have within the episode that will determine how you deal with it. Sometimes when you're really super sick, it's almost easier. when you're kind of half sick and half aware, that's the worst. That is the absolute worst. And that's where I was. And I kept thinking, my children aren't going to love me anymore. My husband's going to hate me. My friends will disown me. All of those feelings came back. You know, they're never going to believe I went back again. And I just couldn't reconcile any of those feelings with being in a centered place and trying to get out. That happened in the last maybe 3/4 of a day that I was there. I was able to sit in my bed, get away from the other patients, get away from the staff, and just say, leave me alone. I'm going to sit this out until you unlock that door.
Well, and I think when you said earlier too that there's no handbook for getting through, you know, an inpatient, you know, mental health experience, that there is a lot of trying to understand, like, and I remember feeling like this too, of what do I have to do exactly to get out of here? And obviously that can lead your brain to some not great places too,
Right.
and some misunderstandings. And I had that as well. But I mean, I really did feel like, okay, so, you know, they're watching what I eat, so I need to eat something. They want to see me participating in group, I'm sure. So I'll go sit and, you know, talk about feelings or something with people that, I mean, it really was not therapeutic or helpful in any way to me, you know, at least during my experience, it wasn't. And so, but almost just trying to discern, like, what is this puzzle, you know, that I have to put together to be able to show that I'm ready to leave here. And I think that is just so confusing, and again makes it an even scarier process. Whereas I think if the medical staff would tell you up front, like, look, these are the things that we're looking for. We want to see
I know.
eating. We want to see that you're participating in group. We want to see that you're interactive, or that you're more coherent in your thoughts and your speech, and, you know, whatever it is, like, okay, give me the checklist. Give me, you know, let me know what is the key, the magic key that's going to unlock this door.
That's exactly the feeling. I want the checklist, and I'm going to show you whatever you need to see. I'm going to be it, and I'm going to get out. And I think, you know, we talk a lot about dreams in my house, and, you know, what'd you dream last night? You know, and my husband's like, I don't remember. And I'm like, dang, because I got a really good one that I want to share with you, and I don't want to bore you, but everyone has their recurring dream, and if you ask anyone, I think they can describe it. And my recurring dream is exactly how you described. It's a puzzle. I have to find my way out of a labyrinth. And that, I think, is because of those experiences. And it's always puzzles that I have to solve.
Oh, wow.
And get them together to get the key, like you say, the key to get out. And I recently had a bad airline experience. I was trapped in a plane.
Oh gosh.
And I'm like, stay calm, do not freak, do not. And I'm like, I'm fine. I was pretty much good on the whole claustrophobia part. That didn't bug me. But the next day, okay, so that flight got canceled on the tarmac. Fine, that happens. Went out, came back, and we had to get another flight, which we were promised, hey, you're going to take off, all of you together in a flight and go to this place. And it wasn't true. It wasn't at all true. We had to find our way on a different flight, which were all sold out. And I was like, this is a terrible conundrum. And I'm running between gates and trying to go to the help center. And I'm like, customer service to me is the labyrinth of when you get sick. And it's triggering. Don't do this to me. Just give me the handbook. Tell me how to get on a new flight, and I'll be fine. But having to find my way through different concourses and different ways, and I'm like, no, this isn't working for me. This is bad. And it's just, I get triggered by being not physically confined, but emotionally confined in like, no, this is a problem and you can't fix it because we're at the customer service desk and you're not. It was just
Mhm.
like, we're at the psychiatric staff and you're not, and you're locked
Mhm.
up and you can't get out. And it's frightening, but it happens in life all the time. So you got to deal with it.
Wow, that's quite an interesting parallel, though, of
Mm-hmm.
being like trapped on a plane and then having to try to figure out what to do next and what are the steps, and when what you were told was not accurate.
Right. Right. It's just
And then
like,
you're supposed to trust people. It's
yeah.
like,
Yeah,
what?
I can't fly the plane myself, and I cannot pry open the door and get inside oversold flights. So tell me how to fix this.
Well, a couple things I just want to show really quick. So Wondra Chang, author Wondra Chang of Sonju, had connected us, and she says, "I'm glad you're doing this interview, Colleen, and I'm grateful to Jane for providing a space to share this important topic." So thanks so
Great.
much, Wondra, and
Hey,
thank you
Wondra.
for connecting us. And she also says, it's hard. It's hard for the people who support you to know how to help when you are in such an unstable place. Do you have any recommendations on that, Colleen?
I would say appeal to the humanness, connect on a human level to the people that are, um, I think it's hard when you label something unstable, because then it's like, well, I'm stable and you're not.
Mm-hmm.
And you're having a hard time and I'm not, so I'm going to try to deal with you.
Yep.
Appeal to someone's humanness. You look stressed. Are you stressed? Are you feeling frightened? Everyone can relate to feeling frightened, and there's so much fear in mental illness, because you scare the liver out of yourself most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't even take an environment that is scary to scare you. You scare yourself
Right.
with your own thoughts and things like that. So when the person appears to be in an unstable place, I would just say, how can I help you feel safe? How can I help you feel more together right now? How can I help you? What can I do to ease your burden right now? Cook me dinner, something like that. And I think, I don't know for sure, but I think that's how I would respond if I were asked questions like that, if I was in an unstable place. I wouldn't say jump off a mountain for me, and I think that's what people are afraid of, that you're going to say something equally as unstable and say, well, this person isn't making any sense, but it's the appealing to the fact that, you knew me before I got sick. You knew me when I wasn't in this place. Remember that, and remember the person I was, and relate to me that way. I think that's the best. I think that's the best way to connect with people that are in a rough spot.
I would also just offer one that I think would have really helped me is don't speak in metaphor either.
Mm.
I can remember during my hospitalization of, some family members coming in and sometimes saying things that were meant to be positive, but it was kind of using like a metaphor or a symbol. And I just didn't, it was kind of like, well, is this a game or is this like where again,
Oh,
you start to feel like things are all being sort of engineered around you. And
yes,
so I think
paranoia
just
gets worse.
speaking really plainly about like, and which is what you're suggesting too, to
Mhm.
say, what do you need? How can I help? And what would make you feel better? I had also had someone ask me in that situation, saying like, well, I don't understand why you feel so unsafe here. I just wish that I understood why you don't feel safe here. Well, I
Mhm.
didn't even feel comfortable to try to tell this person why I didn't feel unsafe there. And
Right.
especially with all of these listening, charting people around me, I'm not going to tell you that. I didn't even write anything when I was there. I didn't want to write anything down because I was so worried that there was no privacy
Yeah.
and that whatever I wrote could have been, taken away and misconstrued or
Right.
read as like, oh, she's not all there kind of a thing.
Right.
So
Right. And the difficulty in finding concrete language to deal with. I think people need to be trained better in dealing with concrete language that isn't metaphorical or isn't going to be construed. And I just think dealing with a human connection is it. And dealing with, I, I see you look scared, or I see you look angry. Is that true? You know, um, uh, and see if appealing to the emotions. But there are times that I don't trust this person, and they don't know why I don't trust them. I don't trust them because they've got high heels on and I'm in the hospital. They look beautiful and I look like crap. And I'm like, why are you even in here? Are you a plant? Your brain is not working at right speeds. And it's hard to, it's just hard. It's just hard. I've never been trained as a psychiatrist. I've never been trained as a psychologist. I don't know what you're supposed to say to people um, uh, that are really in a bad way. I just know what I would like to hear, and I don't even know if it would be helpful.
Well, I also think too, not saying things that are, expressing anger, shame, blame, any of those kinds of things toward the person who is going through this, because I also experienced that, of people around me almost being angry at me, like if this was my fault somehow, or,
Yeah, like you're
I
messing
wouldn't be
with them.
here if you weren't here, or, if you, because you can't get it together, or, are you ever going to get out of here? And, we're wondering about that. And I mean, it's just like, okay, y'all, not love you, but not helpful right now. Like,
Not
not
helping.
helpful.
No.
Because I think there's also the expectation sometimes that, everyone wants you to be normal. Everyone wants you to go back to normal life. And when it takes time to heal and takes time to recover from things like this, you can't just snap back to the person that you were before.
Yeah, that's the frustration, and that is the hard thing for people to realize, because I can be completely sick and look like myself and be normal. That's the whole idea with mental illness. It happens inside your head. And, people talk about being up in your head a lot and stuff and not being in touch and all of that. But that is my world. That is where I live. And it is really difficult to know where people are at, especially after they've just had an episode and they're coming back. How back are you? How well are you? Well, sometimes I got a foot in both worlds, and I'm not 100%, but yeah,
I know
it's
I was not 100% for a long time after that. I mean, I think for at least 6 months, I felt very unsure of myself. I was also like a new, second time mom and had a
right.
baby and a toddler and, all that kind of stuff. And so, like, yeah, I went back to my life and I jumped back into it. Did I feel 100% confident about that? No.
Right.
And like you said, it's almost like, getting both feet eventually back in that world, but it takes some time. I definitely had one foot in the other realm there for a while, even after I wasn't hospitalized anymore. And I wasn't, a danger to myself or anyone else, but it took some time to really get back or go forward and feel like, okay, I know who I am and I'm rebuilding my confidence and I'm rebuilding my strength and
Yeah.
I'm sure,
Transition is very difficult. and we call it sometimes reentry. Like you've been in outer space and you come back and you're like, everybody looks okay, but I've really had a trip, and I've really been in a different space emotionally. And there's that repairing you have to do of your brain to step back into your normal life. And I did mention that in the book about how difficult it was to come home on a Saturday or a Sunday and go back to life on Monday. And my husband's like, oh my God, she's finally home. I can get back to work. And the village all dispersed because there was, the mom was back home in the home. And oh Lord, I was under the kitchen table by that afternoon. I was like, I am not doing okay. And the kids are like, hey, this is a game.
We're playing with mom under the table.
Playing with mom under the kitchen table. I'm like, oh, I got a problem. This is not going well. So it was, reentry is rough. It's really rough. And I think that if I could do anything with the message from the book is to be mindful of people as they come back. It isn't an immediate thing. And it's a lot harder when you don't have physical aspects to rely on. Well, you look okay, you seem okay, but I wasn't. It was, and then, like I said, there's the fatigue of we've been dealing with your kids all this time and get back on the program, and it's
But I'm not there yet.
Not
ready yet. And believe me, I more than anyone wish that I was, wish that I was 100% and could just dive back into life. But I think especially given the trauma, I feel that the hospitalization was more traumatic for me or as traumatic as the things that I was going through.
The separation
in life
from your child, the separation from your spouse, it's
the fear that you'll never get out, all the fears around it, the fear that you're not in a safe environment, not supportive, medical staff, or again, very kind of hot and cold, some people who are helpful and some people who are making, demeaning comments, and it's not easy to wade through all that. I guess that was one other thing that I have several other things I'd love for us to cover. I know we've been on for quite a while, but you write about different relationships in the book with medical staff and sort of how there were some kind of inappropriate comments, there were inappropriate comments that were made to you.
Let's not mess around with
right. That. In various situations. So both from a physical medical professional, I'll use the term loosely, and also from, a psychological medical professional, people that you were seeing. And so what kind of impact do you think that those connections had on you and your recovery and things like that?
I think it had a tremendous effect. I think it was my choice, and I use that term also loosely, of a medical provider in the very beginning caused me to go retrograde. It caused me to get worse. And it was a difficulty that I did not get out of until I extricated myself from that relationship. And that person sold me a bill of goods in terms of, I'm the best person to deal with these problems that you have. I'm exquisitely talented at dealing with these type of problems. And I'm like, oh, well, lucky me. I landed a really great healthcare provider here. And then let's not have you have traditional psychotherapy with a regular person, but I'll do both. I'll do both. And I'll be your medical doctor for medicine, medication management, and then I'll also be your therapist. So we can get it all done with one fell swoop. Well, that sounds good in the beginning when you're naive and you want so desperately to get it better and you want to rely on people. And then you look at it when it goes south, and it did. who do you ask? Who do you turn to? Where do you go for a second opinion or another help when both people that you have to rely on for help are the same individual, and that individual has designs on you and is denying it and gaslighting you into telling you that, oh, that's all in your head. And I'm like, I didn't know. I didn't trust myself. Obviously, I'd been in the hospital. What am I? I don't have a brain that discerns those things. And you're the one with 10 degrees on the wall. It's not me. And so I was completely messed up by that experience. You're right. It really made things difficult to get better.
Well, and when you're having trouble trusting yourself, and then you have someone in the medical community who's preying on you, essentially, and gaslighting you, and then also who turned around and just kind of scrubbed the record after that too.
Right.
And
the official record, what everybody goes by, is just, yeah, she came into the office and this is the medication she's on, and we won't talk about anything else.
What, if you don't mind me asking, what were some of the kinds of things, I know you write about it in the book, but what were some of the kinds of things, just to share so that people know what we're talking about, like that this person was saying to you? Or
well, it is common knowledge if you read any part of the book that I had a obsessive relationship with my gynecologist. So I had this relationship with him, and he was not very didn't put up too many roadblocks for me not to feel obsessed about him. I would just say that's about as euphemistic as I can.
And I think he was definitely dancing on the lines of appropriate and inappropriate, and there was some inappropriate comments and touches and things like that.
Yes,
or that made you at least wonder, like, what is this?
It made me go the whole time questioning myself. Is it me? Is this really happening? Is it happening because I thought it was supposed to happen? It was all this messed up in your head stuff. And then I finally, cracked up, had a complete walnut-sized break over this person, ended up in the hospital. And I had a doctor that was assigned to me I was 28 at the time, and I figured out he was like in his 60s, and I thought he was like ready for retirement, super old. Now that I'm that age, I think, what a fool. You would be fine with that doctor. But I'm like, he can't relate to me. He's too old. He doesn't remember being 28. What a fool. My roommate in the hospital said, you got to take my doctor. He's really good. That doctor that she recommended is the one I had so much difficulty with. And I put a lot of stake in her opinion, and she was not well at the time, but at the time I thought she was all that. And he looked at me from behind the desk, and he gave me one of those looks that only women can describe. It's kind of like, I've got you in my sights. And I thought, why is he looking at me that way? And then I found out that he was the doctor she recommended. And I thought, I don't trust that look, but maybe I must be misinterpreting it. Again, it was discounting my own feelings, my own intuition that was telling me, look out.
And women do that. Women do that so often, unfortunately, that we do want to, I must be imagining it. I'm overreacting. And
I am currently in the hospital. So how could I be in any capacity with good feelings or thoughts? So he looks at me and then he says, I understand that you had a difficulty with your other doctor. We're going to bring him in and give you closure. And I'm like, oh my God. And so the fact that he took that step to me meant that he was in my corner. He was thinking correctly. Turns out the closure was a complete mess. And that is described in the book. And then I went
And
to,
left the door open even more to something you
oh,
were trying to
yeah.
put closure on.
Oh, let's put a closure on it and just swing those barn doors
Because of the
right
doctor's
open.
comments that basically making it sound like he would have been open to a relationship with you. So I'm
Right.
just sharing that.
I'm like, I'm your patient. That's not cool. And so that didn't happen. And then anyway, the doctor said, I am very skilled at, I'm very centered in my sexuality, and I know that I am in a really good place. So we're going to deal with what you're dealing with. And I don't remember if it's in the book or not, but he said something like, I said, really, I need your help. I need your 50 minutes to describe some of these feelings. And he said, you want more than my 50 minutes.
That is in the book.
And I just went crushed. I was crushed at that moment. I just said, where do I turn? Where do I go? How do I get out of this? And I had no place to go.
Mm.
And it just went on and on and on until finally I just said, it was comments like that. If you hear the voice of God and you're on medication, he's the same guy. If you hear the voice of God and you're on medication, then it must be true,
Mm.
and he was a very intelligent man. I know this for a fact. He is above he's out and not practicing anymore, but he I know of other people that wrote books, and he was their doctor, and he was mentioned in those books. I didn't mention him in mine, but I know that he was a skilled psychiatrist for some people, but for me, it was his feelings got involved and it did damage to me. So
That's so terrible, and I'm so sorry that that happened on top of everything else that you were dealing with. Then when you're
yeah.
having people that you can't trust, within the medical community who are supposed to be there to help you and help you heal and
Yeah,
be
I
that
mean,
safe place to share.
yeah, it puts on uh it puts the onus on the professional. It's on them. It's on them to stay in their corner. It's on them to keep their feelings in check. If you have these feelings, and he said that he went to other professionals to deal with me, and they described to him, tell her you're having these feelings. It will validate her intuition. It will validate her feelings of whatever, and then you'll get past it. And he didn't do it until I finally called him on the carpet and said, hey, this is what it feels like. This is what it feels like is going on in this therapy room. Is this a fact? And he said, well, I've discussed it with many professionals, and if it were to come up, I was supposed to say yes, so I'm saying yes. And then he refutes it when it really came time to put up or shut up, and claimed, oh, I never said that. And there's no record in the chart of him saying it, so therefore it didn't happen.
And that he actually spoke with other professionals about it. That's huge.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge admission on his part that he really was, dealing with feelings for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh
But
my
I made it
goodness.
all up. I made it all up.
But that is very, very damaging, especially when you're recovering, from a mental illness, and then you have someone else, in that kind of a role who's discounting your experience.
Yeah. Yeah. That is the ultimate in
That's so
gaslighting.
shoddy. Yeah. Ultimate in gaslighting for sure. So how did you begin, Colleen, to move on from that?
It was finding new professionals. It was really, really the peer support group that I was in, and talking to people that weren't professionals, that weren't in a position of being an authority about it. And uh, it was saying, this happened to me, and how does it feel to you? And that camaraderie and that feeling of not being alone was huge. And I stayed in that group setting for 7 years. And I said, this is incredibly important. And if I were to give any kudos or plugs for people that are looking, I would say find a peer support group, a group of people that are just like you, that don't hold it over you, scholastically, educationally, anything like that. Just go where you're all on the same level and you can share as openly as you can. And I found that in DBSA. It was called something else in Minneapolis at the time, but it morphed into DBSA. So I give my props to them for sure.
That's great. And that makes sense too. Sharing on a peer level could be more healing because again, a lot of the other experiences, with medical staff had not been positive and creates a lot of mistrust. So I can understand why having people that you feel safe just to openly share with and can talk about could be really invaluable. So that's a great suggestion for sure.
Yeah. And write a book. Everybody needs to write a book. That's what I think I want to hear those stories. I want to hear that that experience of yours. And it's not an easy thing to do. It's not something that is just you roll out of bed and the book is there waiting for you to send in to the publisher. But it's a worthwhile experience. And helping you organize your thoughts and put it in a structure and all of that is has been incredibly helpful to me and incredibly validating too. I mean, we also were going to talk about self-publishing and stuff like that, but I talked about it. I remember walking onto the unit in 1989 going, this is a book. This is
I wondered about that. So I'm glad that you're addressing that.
Yeah.
When did you know that this was a book?
And then I thought my ramblings and my horrible journals from back then when I was completely unhinged would be published unedited and they would be that important, I went from that space to no, you need to learn craft, you need to learn process, you need to learn all these things when it comes to how to write a book. And then and only then will you go out and publish something. So I had to really take, not to speak in metaphors that are going to bug you because now we're in a good place, but it was like a piece of dough that was just flour and water that was just like, no, this is no book. This is no nothing. And it had to be massaged and rise and do all that stuff until finally it was what it was. So.
No, I think that's an important distinction though, too, just from a writing and a craft perspective that your raw journals and your raw materials may not be, or probably are not, the final form that your book is going to take. It doesn't mean you couldn't sample, from those
exactly
as an insight, but that it does take those raw materials and then develop a story from that people will be able to understand and relate to and identify with. So that's a good point.
Yeah, there's a time and your brain is not, in a good place and you think everything you touch is like the Midas touch, it's gold and I just wrote that. It's perfect, and you look back at it and you're like, ooh, whoa, that wasn't it.
And we all tend to do that at points, whether we're in the throes of mental illness or not.
Right.
Oh, this is great. And then you look back at it and go, oh, it needs work.
Yeah, it needs work.
So, well, what else would you like to share? Because I could see going on a couple different threads with this. I thought about asking about your husband. I also thought about asking about more the self-publishing and what made you decide to go that route. I know that you and your husband have your anniversary coming up tomorrow. Yes, so, and I guess let's start with that. So I know that that's one piece of the title of your book and the cover and everything is the relationship with your husband. So what would you like to say about that?
I do 100% feel like I'm married for the second time. We both have changed so much in the 41 years we've been married. And we got married, we were babies. We were just children. And we looked at each other like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to make this work? And I immediately went to my go-tos, Fred and Wilma, and Lucy and Desi and all, and my parents and everybody that did the 50s thing. So I got up the morning after we got married and made him eggs. And I'm like, I didn't even want to be in this apartment. What are we doing? It was just
the whole literal playing house kind of thing.
The whole playing house thing. And I'm just like, off you go to work. We didn't have a honeymoon. It was just like.
And you were expecting your first child as well. And so that was also
my first child, and I was tired, so tired. And he went off to work, and I had to sift through his old love letters in boxes that he saved, and I didn't know him well enough to know he saved everything. Instead of that they meant nothing to him. If they had his name on it, he was going to save it. He's an incredible saver. And here I think, he wishes he was married to someone else.
Oh, no.
I'm just completely doing a total job on myself in my little apartment by myself. And I just thought, this isn't going to go far. This is not going to work. And then you flash forward to 40 years later, we have reinvented ourselves. We have reinvented what it means to be married. We have reinvented our relationship. I do not take him for granted anymore. There was a time back when I started to be sick that I was like, he works every darn day to provide for the family and do all these things. And all I could see is, that means I have to mow the lawn and take out the garbage and everything else because he's so busy working. I have to do all those things. And so I had to reevaluate and rejuggle in my head what the roles were. And we've gone from everywhere from newlyweds to grandparents. It's a huge span in a person's life. And now it's just he and I in the house. And I made some comment the other day, it was a while back, but I said, I've lived in community my whole life. And my daughter said, Mother, you don't live in community. You live with Dad. And I'm like, oh my God, the kids are all gone. I forgot about that. Because they're in my mind and in my heart so much. I think and they're right there.
Yeah. And I love, we got all 4 pictures to fit in. I know you were concerned about that.
That's right. There they are.
We got 4 kids and it looks like only 3 are fitting into the shot. So
yeah, but I got them all in. But it was, they're with me in spirit and in my heart so much. I think they live with me, but they haven't lived with me for years. And it is just he and I. And he has been an incredible source of support. He knows, it's like he has to, I think of it like Raiders of the Lost Ark when they say, close your eyes, and all the horribleness when they open the ark by their face and everybody melts. And my husband didn't melt in the face of mental illness, in the face of this emotional infidelity that happened with me. And in the face of all that we've weathered, he did not melt. And he was able to stand strong. And I am so grateful for him. He's just amazing. And is he perfect? No, I got to tell you, he's not perfect. But, and I was listening too, so I had to tell him that. But you're not looking for a perfect partner. You're looking for a partner that's going to stand by you. And that's what I have. And that's what I'm grateful for.
Yeah. And I love how you really bring that home, at the end of the book too, about your husband, standing by you and being that steadfast source of support, even at times when you were in a manic episode and saying, I want to divorce you. And, or I've got a thing for this doctor guy and whatever, and all that. So I think that is a really, those are really admirable qualities that he was able to continue to stand up against that and see you as the person, who you are, like, aside from those bad moments.
Right. He could see through and remember that. That's one thing that never elucidated to myself, but that is the thing that really kept us going, is that he saw me through all the crap. He saw who I was, and I had forgotten myself who I was, but he never did. He always remembered that I was in there, in that head that was spouting stupid stuff and saying things, and and he's like, that's the illness talking. He could separate where I never could. I don't believe I would be in the position if it happened to him. I don't think I'd be as good as my husband, who shall remain nameless. But the name in the
Does
book.
he have a pseudonym in the book? I wondered about that.
He does.
Okay.
You have a pseudonym in the book, and everybody that is mentioned in the book that is my family, that's not their name. So the children, the grandchild, and my husband, that's not what we call them.
And does that just add, again, as a fellow, aspiring memoir writer, does that help to just give a bit more privacy as far as, protecting your family a little bit and not sharing the exact names? Is that kind of
that was my intention. That was the reason that I did it. And it was easier for me to write with someone else's name inserted than it would be. I mean, I have my brothers and sisters, I use their real names. And then I avoid speaking of certain people, and then other people, their names are absolutely changed. Their names are changed for the good and the bad. The people that I didn't feel did me a good service, their names are not the same. And the doctors that are that I had a good experience with, their names are real. So it's kind of hard to discern, but I know who they are. And the difficulty with being a memoirist and writing about these things is your family doesn't ask to be involved in what's going on. And I never wanted to write anything, and we talked about it, we discussed it with the children from their perspective. My children felt that does not happen in the book. It's not in there. And I never wanted to write any of the experience from their point of view, because I don't know it. I wasn't there. I mean, I was there, but I wasn't inside their heads.
Sure.
And so that helped me to give them pseudonyms and did it that way. So you're right. That is why.
That's good to know that was freeing for you, though, too, as a writer, to maybe give just a little bit of distance or perspective, that it made the writing process easier. So.
Yeah, it did. And my little grandson chose his name.
I saw that in your acknowledgement section.
Yeah. I said, what do you think? What would you like to pick? And he goes, Kyle. I would like to be Kyle. Said, great. That's what you're going to be.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's neat. So how much did you sort of run this past your family before you published? Like, did you share the whole thing?
My children my daughter told me very recently that she has read the book, because the other three said, no, thanks. I lived it. I don't want to hear about it.
Yeah, I can see that.
It was painful for me. It was painful to go through. And my son told me, Mom, you've been writing this book my entire life. My entire life you've been writing this book. And it's like the fifth child. We laugh about it. It's the fifth child in the house. And so they kind of resent this book. I think that's my impression. They resent the book. And because it's
the baby.
It's the baby. It's the baby that took on the persona of everything. And it was like that was like a baby Huey that, came in and invaded the house. And but yeah, they so my one daughter read it, and she told me she was wrecked the whole weekend. And I just went, oh. So I don't push it. I did not. My husband has read the whole book, and I gave him veto power against anything that was in there. And I said, if this is too much, or if this is, if you don't want to share this, And then I said, well, I think we have to share that because it's germane to the story. And
Mm.
he just didn't want to look bad. And I said, honey, you look great. You know, you look great at the end of the book. And I said, and you can't look great for the whole book or that ruins the story arc. You have to grow. So I said, you
Exactly.
look perfect in the beginning. You end up really good place. So, you know, be happy about that. So that's what we kind of jokingly decided. But I don't believe the other three have read the book, and I don't know if they're going to, which is okay.
Yeah, and
Which is
I think that that's something that speaks to as well is just different comfort levels, and because this was such a personal story for them as well, that it's
Mhm.
like there are people who are going to be like, oh, okay, let me check this out, but I can understand too giving your husband veto power, but I also think as a memoirist that it's really important not to give too much of that veto power away to other
Totally.
people, because then it becomes not your story anymore
You're
if people are
exactly right
just editing things and making themselves look better and
there.
all
Mhm.
that kind of stuff.
Let's
So
whitewash this and pretend it didn't happen. And nope, that really did. So, and which also brings to mind the story did start out as a novel, and it
mm,
was written as a novel for the first, I don't know. It's hard for me to admit how long I was writing this book. It was decades. But in the very beginning, I would
understandably though.
say, yeah, the first 15 years, it was a novel, and I was mired in detail about how I was gonna, what city I was gonna put it in, and how this was all gonna come about. And then one weekend I was up at the cabin, and I had a writing friend with me, and she said, "This book is a memoir." And I went, "Oh my God, could I ever do that?" And she said, "You're going to do that." And I went
Mm.
on that route since then. And then uh and then I was, having trouble with what to add and what to not, and could I really go there? And I did. And I said, that's the book that's coming out.
And so what led you towards self-publishing with this book?
Well, that was an interesting question too, because the whole time I was in classwork and coursework to learn how to write a book, I was doing the whole query letter thing. I was doing practicing for pitches and, all these things. And then I had just a brush with New York and a brush with the whole agent thing. And I
Mm.
was like, wait a minute, who's in charge here? And it was a very lot of young editors that were completely, I think, in my opinion, dismissive of a lot of older people's experience, because it didn't relate to a young girl in the city, that they were all young girls in the city and they wanted to hear about that stuff. And I'm like, but you guys are missing the point. And then I heard about all these editors that got fired because they were too expensive and they were too
Mm.
much for the publishing houses to keep. And I'm like, who's going to like my book? It doesn't relate to or resonate with younger women. You have to have a little bit of long in the tooth to get it, And so I said, um, I'm really gonna look at hybrid publishing. So I looked at hybrid publishing, and it was very expensive for me. And
Mhm.
and then I looked at self-publishing. Oh, I would never do that. It was like giving up. I didn't try. I literally sent one query letter. One. And said, I want to do a different business model. I want to be in charge of the cover. I want to be in charge of the editing. I have a control freak problem. I know that about. And so I
Same
said,
here.
I am going to go the self-publishing route. Let me investigate that. And I mean, ironically enough, I got an Uber ride to the airport by a guy who was self-published, and he gave me one of his books. He goes,
Oh,
"You're
wow.
writing a book? I'm going to give you one of mine because you tip me well," or something. And I said, "You're kidding." And he told me on the ride from my house to the airport his process of self-publishing. And I'm like, I'm going to do that. And that was one of the light bulb moments for this can be done and you are going to do it.
How
So
cool.
yeah, and there's so much on the forums and on the different places, and I went through Ingram Spark and Amazon because I don't believe you should put all your eggs in either basket. But Ingram Spark does everything Amazon doesn't in terms of getting you into libraries and independent bookstores and places that you belong, and you can't discount any of that. You have to do both, and there's a different way to do both, but you can educate yourself, because I did, and I figured out how it was, and I made sure that I didn't make a lot of the errors that you make, because I learned from other people's mistakes. And then one day hit send, and I was a published author, and it was incredibly moving, and it was a great experience.
I think that's really great because I feel like it's just another building block as far as your healing process and you owning your story and stepping up and sharing that with the world. So I think that that's really cool that that's the road that you decided to take with this book.
Yeah, I just want to promote that to anyone who has that fear of agents and that fear of New York and that fear of the gatekeepers keeping me from telling my story. And they don't have to. You can do it. You absolutely can. And you should, I think, to that horrible word. But
Yeah.
I think that it is definitely a business model for the future. It's a business model that works. And I know a lot of writers that are incented by telling their story rather than making or selling a million copies,
Well, and just the potential of what you may get back is so much higher if you do it on your own than if you do, the traditional publishing process, which is
Mhm.
usually, I mean, it can be as little as 10% that you get back on
Yeah,
sales, depending on, different factors in the contract and all that stuff. But thinking
right.
that you could keep more like 70% of your sales, I mean, that's certainly a nice incentive, and I do believe in writers being paid for their work, and
Absolutely.
that it shouldn't always be writers having to come up with thousands of dollars as part of a hybrid, or some, traditional process sometimes that it's almost expected, or it is expected that, oh, well, you have to be willing to invest between $5,000 and, $20,000. And it's just like, well, okay, but not everyone has that. And yet people have
Right.
valuable things to say and experiences to share. And, it'd be nice to get that out there.
Yeah, for less than a fortune that you're never going to get back. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I
Exactly.
can I can attest to the fact that, I mean, I am privileged in that I was able to get a little bit of the seed money from my husband, and but it wasn't as expensive as I thought, and it wasn't nearly as expensive as going hybrid for me personally. Other people have better success with that, but I looked at that number and said, "Whoa, too much."
Yeah.
So,
Well, we've had people on the chat who have just thanked you for sharing your story. Carla and Phil Cable, thank you for sharing and that you're a survivor. And Diana Aranda says thanks for the sharing and experience and encouragement. And I'd just like to thank you again, Colleen, too, just for being here with us today and sharing all that you have with us so openly and so courageously. And I just so appreciate that, and your book is fantastic, and I
oh,
highly
thank you.
encourage people to go get it. We've been sharing the bookshop link throughout, bookshop.org/shop/author talks. You can go find the books from the show. And is there anything, Colleen, just that you'd like to add?
Just one more thing in that, I would so encourage you, if you've ever thought about it, to write a book, to do it. I just think that, it's just so important. The more people share stories, there is just no limit to the number of books that can be published. There is no limit. And that, once, my grandson told me, he goes, "Nana, there's a dog out there waiting for you. You have to adopt a dog," and I said, "I don't think so, honey. Someone's going to get that dog. That isn't me." But, there's a book out there for you to write, and I do believe that. If you're inclined in that direction, if you ever thought it was in your, bucket list or wishing list or something like that, that I would encourage you to do it, because, it's a transformative experience. It really is. And, I would just encourage that.
Well, that's awesome. I encourage that as well. And thank you so much just for being here again today. Thank you for writing this book. Thank you for sharing your story. And thank you for just being so open with everything with us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me, Jane.
Yeah. So, everybody, thank you so much for watching and commenting. We will see you next week with Francine Rodriguez and A Woman's Story. Thanks so much, everybody.